welcome to the new series from Performance Works International, Guest Practices. I'm Jeremy Blaine, CEO of Performance Works International, and I'll be running a series of videocasts with special guests who have a story to tell from both business and life experiences. The conversations are designed to explore their journey, uncovering new ideas, innovations, and next practices that we can all learn from and be inspired by. I'm excited to welcome Dr. Rochelle Haynes to this week's videocast from Performance Works International. Rochelle is from Barbados and now bases herself in the UK as author, speaker, consultant, lecturer. There's not much she doesn't do, actually. She is an expert in the gig economy and the rise of the independent workforce, how that is impacting organisations everywhere, and how leaders and in particular HR need to develop new frameworks for managing what is the blended workforce of tomorrow, today. We start the discussion by going into detail in what this is all about, but then how to drive it through your own organisations successfully. So hello and welcome to Rochelle. Thanks very much for joining us. Great place to start. Why don't you introduce yourself, your business, and your passion?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jeremy. My name is Rochelle Haynes. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of the West of England. And on top of that, I am the founder and CEO of Crowd Potential Consulting, Inc. And this is a consulting company that really helps businesses to navigate and be prepared for the new world of work. That's in the areas of business competencies, in terms of digital infrastructure and ecosystems, as well as making sure that every type of employee that businesses engage with experience a full and engaging working experience. So that's me, and that's my passion, really. A big part of that is the gig economy. I'm very passionate about making sure that every type of worker has a good work experience, whether that is full-time in-house employee, whether that's somebody working in the middle of the jungle, whether or not that is somebody on a part-time basis or location independent. So yeah, that is me.
Well, and I know, and you're being very modest because you and I both met when we were looking at a similar trend within the workplace, the growth of the independent workforce, how the gig economy was impacting business, all of these kind of things. And then suddenly, I start to discover that you're advising governments around the world on this, you're championing the cause of the so-called digital nomads and the giggers everywhere. So perhaps you can tell us, what is the gig economy, who makes it up, and why should corporate enterprise and even governments take note?
So the gig economy is referring to where people engage with employers or organizations via digital platforms. So that can occur in two ways. That can either be either via crowd platforms or on-demand platforms. And that really speaks to the difference around whether or not it is for someone's delivering their services via a platform. So they might be running their, let's say, their business through this online platform in partnership with another business, or they make contact with their potential client or with the person hiring them through that business platform as well. So it's really speaking about working through a platform to deliver your services or to deliver employment. If you think of Uber, if you think of Deliveroo, if you think of Logo Joy and Upwork, people are very familiar with Upwork. You have a lot of consultants offering services there. That's what we mean by the gig economy, or is also known as the digital economy as well.
And so when you consider the population of that, we did a piece of research together which talked about the blended workforce, which was the coming together of a number of things, which I'll ask you to define because you do it much better than I do. And if we consider that blended workforce with the trend that we see around the gig economy, how things are changing now, particularly post-COVID, working in more dispersed ways with permanent, semi-permanent, independent staff. How can this brave new world of a blended workforce, once you've defined it, of course, better influence how organizations everywhere can transform their attraction, recruitment, management, and overall operations to drive a successful and healthy business going forward?
Okay, so I'll start with the definition, as you said. So when we're talking about a blended workforce, we're talking about a mixture of full-time employees with your location-independent entrepreneurs, with your part-time employees. We're also talking about multi-generational employees or workers within that space as well. So we're basically talking about, when we refer to managing the blended workforce, how do organizations manage the combination of those different types of workers and meet the needs of those different types of workers? And one of the things with COVID-19 and the current pandemic is that it's accelerated the trend towards remote working. So that remote working population has increased significantly and is just now about or over the size of the in-house working population. Although we're finding now that persons are trying to get back into the office as well, that number is changing again. So it's really, well, as you said, Jeremy, we started this research before COVID-19, and we released the paper before COVID-19. Now, what we said at the time was that businesses were not yet ready for this changing world and work. It's like a silent revolution that was occurring with this growing invisible workforce, but businesses were still continuing to manage people in the way that they've always done and catering primarily to the full-time employee. So now with this change and with this growing persons within the gig economy, growing uptake of remote work, now it's forcing a lot of organizations that suddenly have to think of, okay, how do we recalibrate in a way that we're still as effective, still as productive as possible, and also that our employees feel safe and well, they feel like they have a safe space and their well-being is also secured. So one of the things that businesses are having to think about now is how do you transform your capabilities and also your physical and digital infrastructure in a way that ensures that every single worker can be catered for and receive a quality working experience.
And that's absolutely key. We've both done quite a lot of research on this. And in fact, many organizations are finding with this accelerated move to remote working that they just haven't got some of these infrastructures in place, even for their own workforce, let alone the increased influx of independent workers. So what are there any examples that you can give out there of companies that are doing it well, or companies even that had failed and found better ways of doing it?
Yeah, there's a really good, because I do quite a few interviews and case studies across the globe with different companies. And I did one of this company in Jamaica. Someone put me onto this company, actually. They were in the news about it because as soon as the lockdown began, the name of the company is SSL Invest in Jamaica. And the leader or the CEO of that company is Mr. Zachary Harding. And just before the pandemic and the ensuing lockdown, he was already thinking about, okay, he was aware of the changes that were going on in the world of work, but he always thinks as well in this sort of predictive way, risk management way, in terms of what if something serious were to happen that would stop us from working in the office? I need to be prepared for that. So his thinking was already aligned in that way. And he had already started to meet with his IT teams, meet with his management teams, and meet with their various type of workers to put things in place and to discuss what would they need in the event that they could not come into the office. So when the pandemic hit and when the lockdown got introduced, his remote working infrastructure just kicked into gear one time. His employees, the transition from them working in the office to working at home was very smooth. And then the things that he considered in terms of thinking about his employees, he discussed with various types of employees their different needs. He spoke to mothers, for example, and found out, okay, I'm thinking that you have 3 kids and you're going to be in this particular situation. What can I do to help you out if this situation was to occur? And he spoke to, let's say, young single professionals. He spoke to older persons within his workforce. So he really had this open-minded, progressive, forward-thinking idea of, a very caring idea of, okay, I need to ensure that all of my workers feel secure when we switch to remote working. So in doing that, the transition went so smooth that, let's say 3 months in, they decided to give up the lease on their office because they were remote working so well, they were getting along so well, they felt so included and inclusive that they thought, well, the office is an expense they don't need. And then the other thing that he found as well was that productivity increased in his organization. So now their future now is going to be remote work, and they're going to be continuing as a remote working company. And this is a very successful investment firm, and they're doing it all remotely. So that's an example of where it's done very well. I won't name an example of who's not done it too well, but I have spoken to some other firms where the push now is, okay, this remote working is something that we've had to do for now. And now we're ready to get back to the office. Come on, pack it up, let's go back. And what they're facing now is some tension from employees that are really enjoying the remote working experience who don't want to return. So now they're having to manage that sort of, those feelings of anxiety of persons who don't want to go back to the office. And they've also had some persons quitting and deciding, actually, this is what I like. I'm going to start my own thing from home. And I think that's where they haven't really been cognizant of the one-to-one issues and the impact of employees in that remote working space.
Couple of great examples there. And for me, it indicates that switch between a traditional leader mentality and the new leader mentality. One leadership mentality, which of course we see coming out all the time, is, oh, I can't wait to go back to how things were. Whereas with the example that you gave, it's like, let's look forward and consider the possibilities of doing something quite different. And how enlightened that leadership was to talk to all of the stakeholders involved. A lesson for leaders everywhere, surely.
Yeah, absolutely. I was completely amazed because I spoke to a member of his team before I interviewed him directly. And this person, they were gushing over how great of a leader this guy is. And I was really impressed that you can have your employees speaking about you in such a wonderful way. And then when I spoke to him as well, I got it. This, you could tell this was a leader that really cared about their individual employees. And I think that care really comes through, that authenticity and that intuitive and just empathetic leadership really comes through when it, in a situation like this, where you can't be thinking of, okay, how do we keep our numbers up? Okay, how do we get back? Again, the focus there on going back rather than going forward. So I think that was a really, as you said, a very, very enlightened case of leadership, which was brilliant.
Well, it's interesting because you'll know that I'm doing another piece of research at the moment that is looking at the brave new world of leadership.
Yeah.
And what leaders can develop over this next decade post this perfect storm that we're in right now of factors from transformation to pandemics to trade wars to hyper competition. Wow, there's a lot going on there. But interesting to reinforce what you've just said there, the top 4 items coming out from both leaders and employees that we've surveyed are words like empathy, personality, emotional intelligence, and empowerment.
Absolutely.
And what you've described embodies what we're finding.
Absolutely. You should definitely check him out. Zachary Harding from Jamaica. Absolutely.
Most certainly will. He sounds like a great guest for this podcast, actually. So I'll be tagging you on that one for sure. So based on your experience, because you have interviewed so many people around the world, how do you advise or help leaders, stakeholders that you're dealing with to understand the upsides involved of exploring the possibilities within a truly blended workforce and the watch outs that they may come up against so that they can anticipate them and advance and prepare and create the journey in a much more smooth way?
It's really, I go back to that idea of that predictive and progressive thinking in terms of trying to think of all the, and you will never imagine all these scenarios, but just constantly being cognizant that your current situation is not the status quo. There's no longer a status quo. Status quos are so shaky now. So I think it's really to constantly be thinking of the next step forward. Where do we go from here and how do we evolve? And I think in terms of preparing leaders for that, there really needs to be a review of the current management practices that are used in companies. And one of the things that we did with our research was in creating the GigHR model. One of the things that we sought to do there was to get organizations to think of, okay, what are the new rules of the road that you need within this current context? You can't be managing with the same set of rules and the same set of practices. So you now need to be thinking of, how do you re-engineer your workspace? What type of new protocols do you need? What is the let's say the go-to, or what is your thinking in terms of now the execution of work, since that's occurring in a very dispersed way and by very different stakeholders. And in that GigHR framework as well, we also mentioned tools. So how do you create that digital infrastructure? Like, also very much in the at the forefront of all of this is the skills and capabilities in the organization. And if organizations and managers are ready to be successful in that space, then it's really a need to challenge and question your old mindset. I know a lot of leaders sometimes still cling to the old mindset and way of doing things, and that can be such a barrier in moving forward. So I think it's really to start unpicking the old mindset and reevaluating whether or not that is still fit for purpose within the current situation. And then when you're thinking about your workforce as well, just being very cognizant that your workforce is no longer homogenous. It's no longer a case where your employees are primarily full-time or your key stakeholders are in front of you. So what are the requirements of those different types of persons or elements that make up your workforce? And one of the things that we mentioned last year was that workforce also now includes robots. And most people don't think about that in terms of, how do you now manage your people alongside robots? How do you make sure that everyone in a blended team feels recognized, feels valued? How do you make sure that person that's working in the middle of the jungle that you might only have contact with once or twice a week, how is their work also recognized in that overall team effort? So it's really a rethink of the mindset and not just a focus on the tools that, let's say, facilitate that.
Yeah, and we sort of talked about this before about being a brand new manifesto, essentially, for human capital management. So it's not just gig HR, as you mentioned, it's gig leadership.
Absolutely.
It's this different mindset that is required there, and all of these potential upsides, as you've so eloquently put, are potential watch-outs and risks if they don't get it right.
Absolutely. There is very little room for error now. It's become a situation of do or die, to put it rather plainly or dramatically. And we've seen a lot of companies that have gone bust during this time because of the inability to recalibrate very quickly, or the fact that that company was very much fitted for the old normal rather than the current situation that's developed.
Yeah, and at the heart of that, of course, is being digitally enabled.
Yeah.
Not being overwhelmed by it, but putting that ecosystem in place that can glue all of this together, be it communication, collaboration, co-working, projects, all of these things in place. And you mentioned robots, but it's quite interesting. About 2 years ago, did a piece of research at a school careers fair.
Yeah.
And specifically with Generation Z.
Yeah.
And when I said, what do you expect at the workforce? The two things that came up, first of all, we want to collaborate with others, which I found interesting because that is actually how they're learning now. It's project-based work. They do the work online and they come in and work together. And the second is when we get there, we expect to have an artificial intelligence as a personal assistant.
Yeah.
Because they're so used to using it on their phone right now. And it's not even unleashed piece of technology. It's not there yet. It will be better with 5G as that comes in and it's faster. But that'll be a real game changer too. And if organizations can get a hold of that quickly, it can really enable what you're talking about.
Yeah. So it's really as well for organizations. How do you manage and work alongside that new technology rather than feeling threatened by it? Or rather than seeing it as just a piece of technology, because that now has to be integrated and workers have to be prepared to work alongside these new elements. And a big part of that for the rest of the workforce, for managers as well, is how do you allay some of the anxieties that come around for the anxieties that are introduced for your other employees when that technology is brought into the workplace. So well-being is a big part of it as well.
It is. It's a huge part of it. And that is also coming out of the survey that I'm doing right now as a very key point for everybody concerned, trumping some of the bigger things like skills development, personal development. People are now looking for a platform of well-being, mental health, security, psychological safety before they'll buy into a number of these other things, interestingly. So moving from what you've just said there then, because let's consider again that there are two sides to this, of course. There's the organizations themselves. Then there's this huge industry, this gig economy, the independent workers, contractors, stakeholders who are out there. And both have to meet in the middle. So what are your key messages to both to make this work? Because, of course, not all independent workers are getting it right, are they?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the main things I would say is that there is a responsibility on both parties' side. So that starts from the very beginning in terms of negotiating terms and contracts, terms and conditions of how that work should occur, especially if you're working with somebody that you know you will probably never see, but they're delivering a service for your company. I think those best practice examples that I've seen are where companies actually provide some sort of room or space for, let's say, the digital nomad to have an input in that conversation in terms of what their working conditions, what their working terms should be. So I think it really needs to be a partnership there in terms of how that relationship is managed. From the digital nomad or entrepreneurs side or those within the gig economy side, I would say just always stay alert in terms and always be seeking to continually develop yourself and let's say, what's the word I'm looking for? Review your brand and enhance your brand as let's say an entrepreneur or someone to be hired as well. So there's a responsibility for development and the management of that relationship, both from the digital nomad, but also from the client. I would say in terms of that relationship and starting off that conversation, both need to be very upfront about what they want, how they want to work, where they see their future going, or let's say what is the next step they see after this particular project. How will they expect to be paid, which is a big thing because a lot of digital nomads often get stiffed, let's put it that way, by a lot of people that they work with. So I think a very fair way and a very, let's say, beneficial way for both parties would be to make sure that you start off with that initial conversation where both parties have a voice and that voice is heard and taken on board.
So before we end, I want to ask you for 3 key things our audience can take away here to get started, be they independent workers or from a corporate perspective.
Yeah.
We've covered through what your experience has been. We've covered the gig economy, who makes that up. We know that is now impacting organizations and driving this new trend of the rise of the blended workforce and the need for new frameworks like GigHR, as you mentioned, leadership with a different lens on, and so on. We've looked at what works, what could get in the way. So from that perspective, considering all sides, what are 3 key messages that our listeners can take away that will help and really get on board with this and start to do something?
Yeah, I think for leaders, one of the main things I would say is to forget the normal, forget the past, forget the normal, and start thinking about how do you now engage persons within this new context. Think beyond the organizational walls and the organizational boundaries and start thinking about more global engagement, because that's where a lot of your key and expertise talent will now be coming from within that global space. For digital nomads, very much be confident and be very bold in the way in which you represent yourself to companies, and also just make sure Just also recognize that you have power in that relationship as well. Yes, you're trying to get work from your client, but you also have a say in the way in which that work should be done. What I would say, the third thing I would say, and this is to both parties, would be to have some sort of terms and conditions spelled out at the very beginning of that relationship, and let those terms and conditions include all of the expectations and also show up any sort of conflict of expectations within that working relationship moving forward. And so you don't end up in trouble, let's say, when you reach the middle of the contract, the middle of the project, or coming close to the delivery. If you have those expectations and possible clashes of opinions, clashes of just understanding in that project outlined from the very beginning, then you can address them before they become a real problem moving forward.
And the obvious question then is that, being an expert in this area, how can those that are interested work with you, and what can you do to help them move through this, be they on the corporate side or be they independent workers?
Okay, so we offer a number of services through our business Crowd Potential Consulting. So a good place to start would be on our website, www.crowdpotential.co.uk. And for businesses, we offer strategic consultations and organizational diagnosis. We offer executive coaching and mentoring, online webinars, key interactive workshops and sessions, and another keynote delivery as well. And for the individual digital nomad or entrepreneur person looking to build their business, we offer a lot of career coaching packages, employer branding packages. So how do you position your company in a way that would be attractive to persons around the globe? And we also offer, let's say, we have what we call 45-minute elevate calls, where we speak to you and you tell us what is the issue that you're facing, and we help to coach you, or we give you a beginning of an outline of how you can actually start to plan and address that problem. So there are a number of ways that we work with our clients, but a good place to start would be on our website, proudpotential.co.uk.
Oh, I love that. 45-minute elevate calls. Fantastic. Well, look, we've come to the end of our journey, and a fascinating one at that. We've covered a lot of ground here, and I'm sure a lot of people listening to this will be really interested to hear not only what we need to do, but some of the trends which are driving this from behind it. So from me, thank you so much for joining us, Rochelle, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. It was great to be here. Take care, Jeremy.
Bye-bye. Thank you for joining our Guest Practices videocast. Please do subscribe to our YouTube channel through the link below, or check out our website to access more in our current series of expert interviews.